I found a locked room in my new house, and now I can't sleep. Moving into a new house is supposed to be exciting, right? A fresh start, new surroundings, the chance to make a place truly your own. That's what I thought when I finally bought my first home. It's a small old house in a quiet neighborhood, built sometime in the early 1900s. I liked the character it had, the creaky wooden floors and the slightly uneven walls. But there was one thing I didn't expect: the locked room. When I first toured the house, I noticed the door at the end of the hall on the second floor. It looked just like the other bedroom doors, plain, white, and old, but it had a heavy padlock on it. The real estate agent brushed it off, saying the previous owner used it for storage and she didn't have the key. It wasn't a deal breaker for me, so I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd get the lock removed after I moved in and see what was inside. The first few weeks in the house were fine. I settled in, unpacked, and started to feel comfortable. But that door at the end of the hall kept nagging at me. I was curious, of course, but there was something else. It felt wrong. I can't explain it. But I found myself avoiding looking directly at it whenever I walked down the hall. I'd hurry past it at night, feeling this strange sense of unease, like someone was watching me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I called a locksmith to come out and remove the padlock. He arrived the next day, a friendly guy in his 50s who joked about people locking away their skeletons in the closet. I laughed nervously, but when he finally cracked the lock and pushed the door open, my laughter died in my throat. The room was small, barely big enough to be a closet, but it was lined with mirrors. Every wall, including the ceiling, was covered in large old mirrors with tarnished frames. The floor was covered in dust, and there was nothing else in the room. No furniture. No signs that anyone had used it for anything. Just the mirrors, reflecting each other endlessly. I didn't like the way I looked in those mirrors. It wasn't that they were dirty or distorted, though they were, but something about my reflection felt off. It's hard to describe, but it was like my reflection was just a split second behind my movements. Almost imperceptible, but definitely there. I left the room quickly, telling myself I'd clean it out later and figure out what to do with it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those mirrors and how wrong they felt. Around 3 a.m., I heard something from down the hall. It was faint at first, just a soft tapping sound, like someone was lightly knocking on a door. I sat up in bed, listening intently, and then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the sound was coming from the locked room. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it was just the house settling or some other innocent explanation, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. I got out of bed, grabbed the baseball bat I kept in the closet, just in case, and slowly made my way down the hall. As I approached the door, the tapping stopped. I stood there, bat in hand, heart pounding in my chest, and then nothing. The house was silent. I almost turned around and went back to bed, but something made me reach out and touch the door handle. It was cold, unnaturally cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. I pushed the door open, just a crack, and peered inside. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. The room was just as I'd left it, empty and lined with those damn mirrors. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. My reflection, standing there in the mirror closest to the door, was smiling at me. I wasn't smiling. I was terrified, but my reflection was. It was a cruel, twisted smile that sent a wave of nausea through me. I slammed the door shut and backed away, feeling like I was going to be sick. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, every light in the house turned on, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, my mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I decided to lock the room up again. I bought a new padlock and secured the door, hoping that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. The tapping started again that night, louder this time, more insistent, and it hasn't stopped since. Every night, I hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And every night, it gets harder to ignore. I can feel it wearing me down, the constant fear and anxiety eating away at me. I haven't slept in days. I'm afraid that if I do, I'll wake up to find that the thing in the mirror isn't just my reflection anymore. I couldn't take it anymore. Last night, I decided to face whatever was in that room. Maybe it was a bad idea, maybe I'm just sleep deprived and losing my mind, but I couldn't live with the fear any longer. I needed to know what was happening. I waited until the tapping started. 3 a.m., right on the dot. I grabbed my bat, my phone, and a flashlight, then walked down the hall, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. The tapping grew louder as I approached the door, echoing through the hall like someone was banging on the inside of the door, desperate to get out. When I reached the door, I hesitated for just a moment before unlocking it. The tapping stopped the instant the padlock clicked open. My heart was racing, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run, but I couldn't. I had to know. I pushed the door open, and the room was exactly as I'd left it. Dusty, empty, lined with mirrors. But this time, something was different. My reflection was already there, standing in the center of the room, staring directly at me. But it wasn't just one reflection, it was all of them. Every mirror in the room showed me standing in the center, that same twisted smile on my face, only it wasn't me smiling. I stepped into the room, my eyes fixed on the reflections. They didn't move with me this time. They stood still, smiling that horrible smile even as I walked closer. I felt a cold dread settling into my bones, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what was happening. When I reached the center of the room, the reflections all turned to face me at once. It was like a wave of movement, every reflection turning their head in unison, their eyes locked on mine, and then, one by one, they started to step forward, out of the mirrors. I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot. The reflections stepped closer, their movements slow and deliberate, their smiles widening until they didn't even look human anymore. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The first reflection reached me and placed its hand on my shoulder. It was cold, so cold it burned, and I felt my own smile start to twist and stretch, matching the one in the mirror. Then, another reflection grabbed my other arm, and another, until they were all surrounding me, their hands pulling me closer to the mirrors. I felt myself being dragged forward, my face inches from the glass, and then nothing, just darkness. I woke up in my bed this morning, drenched in sweat. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, just a terrible, vivid dream. But then I noticed the dirt on my shoes, the dust on my clothes, and the new padlock on the door at the end of the hall. I don't know how I got back to my bed, but something tells me it wasn't by my own choice. The tapping hasn't started again yet, but I know it will. I can feel them watching me, waiting for the right moment to finish what they started. I don't think I have much time left. If you're reading this, please don't make the same mistake I did. If you ever find a locked room in an old house, leave it alone. Some doors should never be opened. And if you hear a tapping at 3 a.m., don't answer it. I don't think I'll be able to write again. This is my last warning to you all. The mirrors, they're not just in that room anymore, they're everywhere. Every time I catch my reflection out of the corner of my eye, I see them. They're coming for me. Don't let them take you too. Case 2, what happened? First date WV bartender. I'm going to give my own context so you get me further on into my story/situation. I am F34. I've been dancing since I was 13. Studied dance in college, not a big drinker or goer of bars unless there is dance involved, then I'm there, but still don't really drink. Okay, so this is my dilemma. I attended a local bar I had been wanting to go to for a while. They host a Latin night on Thursdays and every third Saturday, if the month. Well, I went for my first time on a Thursday, had a great time, they gave a free lesson. I took it for fun, and when I approached the bar, I smiled and asked for some tonic water. Well, when that bartender smiled back, he was very cute, had an amazing smile, and he did act differently from his coworkers. He seemed more serious and quiet, and just doing his job, so Elle liked that. His demeanor was great, so he didn't charge me for the tonic water, and I still tipped him. I did catch him looking at me a few times while I was dancing, and I left it at that. Fast forward to the next Saturday was the Latin night, so I went with my cousin this time. We arrived there, and took the first two seats at the bar. Our cover included a drink, so we order with a lady bartender who I think is like a manager there. We got there around 9:30, thinking the class would start at 10, but didn't start till later. Anyways, I did see the cute bartender when we sat down, and I noticed him looking over our way plenty of times. He was tending to the middle of the bar, and he would move a little closer towards the front, and I locked eyes with him a few times. Fast forward to the exciting part, it was later on in the night, and I ordered water again with him. My sister had met up with us by this time, and we were getting ready to leave, when both my cousin and sister said, "Give him your number. You have nothing to lose." Well, I'm shy when it comes to stuff like that, and Elle even got clammy hands, and my sister ended up handing him my phone number. He was at the end of the bar. She went up to him and told him who I was, and even pointed at me. She said he went from a tired, miserable face to a big smile. So I ended up waiting 3 days before I heard anything from him. I got a cute text saying, "Hey, I hope this is your friend gave me your number, but I couldn't tell if your phone number had a 9 or 4. So if this is you, hi, if not, we'll..." And it took off from there. We hit it off really good. We shared how we both had taken a chance when I gave my number. And when he decided to text me, he said through text, "It's been a long time since I've been interested in meeting someone. I've been focused on my own goals for a long time. But I immediately was interested in you from the first time you were there." Copyright. And for context, this guy's schedule is very not your 9, 5, and neither is mine right now. I'll also have a lot of experience in customer service and the food industry. So it was kind of unspoken that when we could text each other, So I would wake up to his texts, and then I would usually be answering when he was either busy with his two business he's trying to start, or he was napping. Anyways, there was plenty of interest, flirting, and I initiated that we should see each other for a date IRL. Outside the bar/his work. I suggested a really quaint local coffee shop. At this point, we both know we love coffee. We both have wanted to open our own business. His is a coffee shop and mine is a bakery. I've been baking since Vertical Bar was 11. We both love reading, and the biggest thing I loved that he said was we both like distressing with healthy things like hiking, taking a walk. For me, it's dancing. We both play instruments, and he actually knew what I was talking about when I told him I studied mostly contemporary dancing. Now, the day of the date, we both were running late and communicated it. It was cute because he couldn't find the entrance, and he texted me he was lost. He ended up finding it. Let me tell you, when you meet someone at night, and that Jesus light hits them, and they look more handsome than when you saw them at night. That was me. We were both a little nervous, and I somehow thought it was wise to explain a coffee menu to an ex-barista, haha. That's how nervous I was. He date went really great. We had a little humor, and we talked about our families a little. He shared his loathing for how he doesn't want to be at work permanently, and he also shared that he was working on a house he inherited from his uncle that he's slowly renovating. So that's a bartender job. 2-business-1 with his brother and the house. So yes, we talked about how I was scared that I would catfish him because he had someone else in his head from that night. That wasn't me. LOL. He said, "No, it's you." We talked about traveling, Ethiopia food, because I love Asian food and eating with my fingers. We also talked about how we like living slowly, and he said that what he has had a difficult time with lately because his brother is in town from Spain to start up the first business with him, and that's thrown him off. The biggest detail was he brought a book with him and said, "I thought I would bring you a book for your trip so you can have something to read. I haven't read it, but I heard it's really good." I was going to Austin the next week, and I had shared that with him. I was like, "That is so thoughtful. Thank you so much," and stuck in my backpack. Anyways, our date lasted about 2.5 HRS, almost 3, and he was going into work that day later in the afternoon. We both hugged like a good hug and went our separate ways. A few hours later, I sent him a message. "I had a great time today. Thanks for lending me your book." I didn't get a message back until a day later, which I was expecting because people have lives. His last reply was interesting. I was hoping what I had said would be open-ended enough to get a second date in, but he sent me the picture below. I answered him about 2 days later because honestly the day of was crazy with family in town, and I thought I had sent it and it was only half written and not sent. So I sent it, and I apologized. Saying, hey, sorry, this is why it took me a while to respond, I didn't get a response. And while I was on vacay, I didn't get anything, which I was already overthinking a shitload of stuff like I did something wrong, or maybe I was too much for him. I thoroughly sound boarded with my GFS, and they said, just leave it. He might be busy, and he will text back. Well, about 5 days after that last text L had sent, I sent him a picture of me by the pool, reading his book, thinking it's cheeky and flirty, and, I actually have enjoyed his book. Well, after that, crickets upon crickets. Any advice, or I guess if anyone relates out there, I would love your feedback. Now, I have gone back twice since I came back to that same bar for Latin night. Maybe I will post that as a part ill, because this post is long. Anyways, I would appreciate maybe a different perspective and a guy's perspective I don't know at this point. I just realized I can't post a screenshot of my last two texts because of rules. So if you have questions on that or need details, you can just ask. Case 3. Scary music coming from abandoned house. It was one of those typical, uneventful weekends in the small town where I lived. There wasn't much to do in the middle of nowhere, so my friend Mark and I often found ourselves driving around on the endless back roads that crisscrossed the countryside. It was our way of passing the time, escaping the monotony of small-town life, and indulging in the sense of freedom that came with being miles away from civilization. On this particular night, the air was cool and the sky was clear, dotted with a few scattered clouds that drifted lazily across the moon. The old beat-up car I was driving rattled as we bumped along the gravel roads, but we didn't mind. It was just part of the experience. We had no destination in mind, no particular place to be. We were just driving, enjoying the quiet and the dark solitude of the night. We had been out for a while, taking turn after turn down the twisting dirt roads, when we found ourselves in an unfamiliar part of the countryside. It was easy to get lost out here, and we had done just that. The road seemed to go on forever, flanked by thick woods on either side. The headlights of the car barely penetrated the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the trees. "Where do you think we are?" Mark asked, his voice breaking the silence. I shrugged, glancing at him briefly before returning my focus to the road. "No idea. I don't think we've ever been out this far before." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful, as he looked out the window. "It's kind of creepy out here, isn't it?" He wasn't wrong. There was something eerie about the stillness, the way the trees seemed to close in around us, and the fact that we hadn't seen another car or house in miles. It was as if we had left the world behind and entered some forgotten, isolated corner of the earth. After what felt like hours of driving, we came upon a small, narrow lane that branched off from the main dirt road. The lane was overgrown with weeds and grass, and it looked like it hadn't been used in years. I hesitated for a moment before deciding to turn down it, curiosity getting the better of me. We followed the lane for a few minutes, the car bouncing over ruts and potholes, until something caught my eye. Up ahead on the right side of the road was a small shack-like house. It was barely visible in the darkness, and I almost missed it entirely. "Hey, look at that," I said, slowing the car to a crawl as we approached the house. Mark leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "What is that? A house?" "Looks like it," I replied, pulling the car to a stop on the side of the road. "An abandoned one by the looks of it." The shack was a sad, forlorn sight. The roof was caved in on one side, and the walls were weathered and faded, the paint peeling away in long strips. The yard in front of the house was a tangled mess of tall grass and weeds, some of which had grown up to nearly 2 feet high. The windows were fogged over, dirty, and cracked, giving the place a ghostly appearance. "I wonder how long this place has been sitting here," Mark mused, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Who knows?" I replied, my eyes fixed on the house. "It looks like it's been abandoned for years." For a moment, we sat there in silence, just staring at the house. There was something about it that made my skin crawl, something that set off warning bells in the back of my mind, but at the same time, there was a part of me that was drawn to it, a part of me that wanted to explore, to see what secrets this old, forgotten place might be hiding. "I think we should check it out," Mark said suddenly, his voice breaking through my thoughts. I turned to him, raising an eyebrow. You serious? That place looks like it's about to collapse. Yeah, but that's what makes it interesting, he insisted, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. Come on, when's the last time we found something like this? It's not like there's anything else to do tonight. He had a point. The prospect of exploring the abandoned house was far more exciting than driving around aimlessly for the rest of the night, and besides, I couldn't deny that I was curious. Curious enough to ignore the nagging feeling of unease that had settled in my gut. All right, I said finally, killing the engine and unbuckling my seatbelt. Let's check it out. We got out of the car and made our way toward the house, our footsteps crunching on the gravel. The closer we got, the more ominous the house seemed. It loomed over us like a dark, shadowy figure, its windows staring back at us like empty, soulless eyes. My heart began to beat faster, and I could feel the adrenaline starting to kick in. As we approached the front door, something strange happened. From inside the house, we could hear music, soft, eerie music that seemed to float through the air like a ghostly whisper. It was faint at first, but as we drew closer, it grew louder, the notes slow and distorted, like they were being played on an old, broken cassette tape. "What the hell is that?" Mark whispered, his eyes wide with shock. I shook my head, my pulse quickening. "I don't know, but I don't like it." We stood there for a moment, frozen in place, listening to the haunting melody that seemed to seep from the very walls of the house. It was a strange, otherworldly tune, the kind of music that sent chills down your spine and made your skin crawl. There was no rhythm to it, no recognizable melody, just a series of disjointed notes that seemed to loop endlessly, warping and bending in ways that didn't seem natural. "Maybe it's just an old radio," I suggested, though I didn't believe it for a second. "Or maybe the wind is messing with something inside." "Yeah, maybe," Mark muttered, though he sounded just as unconvinced as I was. I took a step closer to the door, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Every instinct in my body was telling me to turn around and leave, but something compelled me to reach out and touch the door, to push it open and see what was inside. But before I could make a move, the music changed. The notes became slower, more drawn out, and the distortion grew worse until it sounded like the tape was about to snap. It was as if the house itself was reacting to our presence, as if it was trying to warn us to stay away. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. Without a word, I turned and bolted back to the car, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark was right behind me, and we didn't stop running until we were safely inside the car with the doors locked. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking, as I tried to start the engine. Finally, the car roared to life and I floored the gas pedal, tearing down the dirt road as fast as I could. The house quickly disappeared from view, swallowed up by the darkness. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The only sound was the engine and the gravel crunching under the tires as we sped away. My mind was racing with thoughts of what we had just experienced, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following us. Finally, Mark broke the silence. "What the hell was that?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking, "but whatever it was, I don't want to find out." We drove in silence for the rest of the night, our adventure over, but the memory of that abandoned house and the eerie music that came from within stayed with us long after. We never spoke of it again, and we made a point to avoid that part of the countryside whenever we went out driving. Some places are better left unexplored, and that old shack was definitely one of them. Case 4, I moved in with my girlfriend recently. I don't feel safe anymore. After moving in with my girlfriend, Victoria, everything seemed perfect at first, but it quickly took a terrifying turn. We met 7 months ago and instantly connected. So when I graduated from university, we decided to live together. Victoria was already working and had her own place, so I moved into her house. On the first night, while she was off to her night shift, she warned me about the cranky neighbors who get loud at night. I brushed it off, thinking it wouldn't be a big deal. But around 2 a.m., the neighbors started screaming, banging on walls, and shattering glass. It sounded like a violent argument, but with multiple voices overlapping. I tried to ignore it, but the noise was unbearable. The next day, I didn't mention it to Victoria, assuming it was normal, but the following night, things escalated. While watching TV, the screaming and banging began again. Then, someone started pounding on the back door, screaming, as if trying to break in. I grabbed a knife, my heart racing, and pressed against the door, fearing for my life. Eventually, the noise stopped, but I was left shaken. When Victoria came home in the morning, I told her what happened. She downplayed it, saying as long as the door was locked, I should be fine. I insisted that I couldn't live like this, fearing for my safety every night. She promised to talk to the neighbor's wife and assured me it would be better. That night, Victoria texted me, saying the problem was solved, and I relaxed, falling asleep on the sofa. But around 4 a.m., the screaming started again. This time, the noise seemed closer, like it was inside the house. Following the sound, I realized it was coming from the basement, a place I hadn't explored yet. My heart pounded as I approached the locked door. Using a skill my uncle taught me, I picked the lock and forced the door open with a crowbar. What I found was horrifying. Dozens of dead bodies lined up in the basement, each one looking like Victoria's ex-boyfriends. Their faces, trapped in a jar, were screaming in agony as if their souls were imprisoned and suffering. The stench was unbearable, and I realized that the last name written in blood with no body behind it was mine. As I processed this nightmare, I got a text from Victoria saying she was on her way home and suggesting we have some fun that night. My blood ran cold as I realized the danger I was in.